Since the first year of his first term in office, he has wanted a parade. And not just a normal parade, he wants a military parade. After Trump in his first term saw a military parade in France for Bastille Day, he said he wanted to top that. He said he wanted something bigger than that, something more like the gigantic Death Star military parades held by countries like China and Russia and North Korea. Specifically, Trump wanted tanks. He wanted tanks upon tanks rolling down the boulevards of Washington, D.C. The issue with tanks, though, is that they weigh a ton. To be more exact, American tanks weigh like 30 to 70 tons, more or less, depending on the model, which is way too heavy to roll down the streets of Washington, D.C. without destroying the streets of Washington, D.C. So in his first term, Donald Trump did not get his military parade with tanks. But he did get a consolation prize. Halfway through his first term, on the 4th of July in 2019, he held what he called a salute to America in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Basically, he gave a speech, a stationary speech, and he did have tanks, but they were not tanks rolling by. They were also stationary tanks. In fact, the closest thing to a parade that day was the convoy that was required to get the tanks into position, because the tanks had to be carried toward the memorial on semi-trucks and then carefully rolled off the trucks onto a series of strategically placed wooden planks where they put them on little platforms so they wouldn't break anything. That was it. Tanks on semi-trucks and then on little plinths. That was it. His whole first term, Trump never got the big military parade he wanted. Now, of course, he's trying again. The Army now says it is planning a military parade complete with more than 6,000 soldiers and, you guessed it, tanks. It is still unclear if those tanks will be rolling or stationary or on the back of semi-trucks, maybe. But the whole spectacle is set for the 250th anniversary of the founding of the U.S. Army, which also happens to be the president's own birthday, June 14th. And if that news makes you want to be somewhere, anywhere else, take heart. Something else is happening that day. At more than 100 locations around the country thus far, I have a feeling there's going to be more than that. A coalition of groups, including Indivisible and Social Security Works and 5051, they are all organizing a nationwide day of protest for June 14th. They're calling it No King's Day. As they put it on their website, quote, Donald Trump wants tanks in the street and a made-for-TV display of dominance for his birthday, a spectacle meant to look like strength. But real power isn't staged in Washington. It rises up everywhere else. Joining us now is Ezra Levin, co-founder and co-executive director of Indivisible. Ezra, it's nice to see you this evening. Thanks very much for making time.
Great to see you, Rachel.
So we've spent a lot of time covering sort of the character and the effect of protests of all kinds around the country. A lot of those organized through Indivisible, a lot of them organized through 5051 and other groups. What is the basic idea, the specific idea, I guess, around June 14th?
Look, Donald Trump wants to spend tens of millions of taxpayer dollars to throw himself a big fancy parade with tanks in the streets. And on one level, this is ridiculous, right? But he is doing this for a reason. This is straight out of the authoritarian playbook. He wants to project strength. He wants everybody to think that he is all powerful, that he rules the world. He doesn't. He doesn't. As we said on that website, look, real power is not in D.C. It's distributed all across the country. And what we're looking to do on No King's Day is to say, look, Donald Trump does not own the flag. He does not own patriotism. In fact, we can all show up in opposition to a king in this country. And this isn't about any individual organization. This is about all of us. Whether you are from the faith community, whether you're a veteran, whether you're an activist, whether you're a teacher, you can be part of this. That, as you mentioned, there are 100 events so far. This has been up for the weekend, available to register events. I would expect over 1,000. We saw 1,100 for May Day protests. We saw over 1,300 events all across the world for April 5th hands off. If you are watching this right now and you are thinking, well, I don't want a king in this country, good news, neither do we. And you can be part of this. Look up, see if you've got an event near you. If you don't, congratulations. You are going to be the organizer for an event in your community. We need them in rural communities. We need them in urban communities. We need them in red states and purple states and blue states. Ultimately, this comes down to all of us. We have got to do the work to show that, yes, this is a constitutional republic, and a constitutional republic has no kings.
Ezra, over the course of the first 100 days of Trump in office, I feel like what I saw as the effect of protests were sort of two things. First of all, because the protests weren't just one big protest one day in Washington or one big day in New York or something like that, but because the protests were constant and happening so frequently and happening in literally every state in the country, and I'd say over time in almost every town of any size, and some towns of no size. Because they happen in so many places, one of the effects was that a lot of Republican members of Congress and senators found themselves confronted by their own constituents about stuff that Trump was doing that they themselves, as elected Republicans, couldn't defend and couldn't explain, and felt like they had to ultimately say, OK, I side with my constituents on this. And that drove a lot of caving in Washington in terms of what Trump was trying to do. But then the other thing that I saw happen is that I think the large numbers of protests over time happening all over the place created a sort of culture in which it was shameful to capitulate. And the groups, whether they're law firms or billionaires or business interests or anybody else, or Republican electeds or anybody else, or even Democratic electeds who were thinking about sort of cozying up to Trump, looked at this footage and looked at what was going on in these communities and looked at these large protests and felt like, you know what those people are asking for is probably the right side of history, and I don't feel comfortable staying on the other side of that. I felt like it created a cultural dynamic in which it was embarrassing to be siding with Trump. That's what I've been seeing, just covering this stuff in order to tell people about the news over these past 100 days. I wanted to ask for your reaction to those observations and ask, as somebody who's been involved really right in the middle of this, if you feel like the impact has been something other than that.
Look, you are exactly right. What we are doing with mass protest, mass peaceful protest in communities red, blue, and purple around the country is not just showing up for the sake of showing up. We're showing up to send a message to everybody else who is looking to their left and looking to their right and trying to decide, what do I do? And as you said, this is law firms, this is universities, this is businesses. People are trying to understand, is this guy for real? Is he in power forever? Do I have to adjust to this new reality permanently? Or will there be a new day of accountability that follows the Trump administration? And by showing up en masse repeatedly, month after month, week after week, day after day, in many cases, what we are doing is sending a very strong signal to those businesses, those universities, those law firms that, oh, I can't actually just cover myself today or next week because this guy's going to be out soon. He's an unpopular, lame duck president, and there is going to be a future post-Trump era, and I'm still going to be a law firm. I'm still going to be a business. I'm still going to be a university. I'm going to have to contend with my actions today. So the smart move stops being, I'm going to cover myself today, and it becomes, I've got to think about what comes next.
That's right. We all should be thinking about that all the time in terms of it, explaining ourselves to ourselves in the mirror and to future generations about what we did in this moment. Ezra Levin, co-founder and co-executive director of Indivisible. Mr. Levin, thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Rachel.
I'm guessing it's how Wile E. Coyote felt, having vaulted over the cliff edge, suspended in midair, aware of what was about to happen, but unable to stop it from happening. This afternoon, the American economy, like our friend Mr. Coyote, is in that spot, in stasis, hovering before a likely plunge. How far or how fast will fall is a matter of some debate, but people involved in shipping, imports, and supply chain planning and economics are making themselves very loud and very clear today that the first dire signs of trouble are already here. Consider the sheer drop in volume among imports this afternoon, stuff coming into our country. Gene Soroka, executive director of the Port of Los Angeles, suggesting arrivals could drop by 35% this week or next, as shipments out of China have, quote, essentially ceased. Beyond the effect this will inevitably have on the price and availability of lots of things, there are downstream effects on the entire economy as well. Watch.
How much are you going to see a real decline in dock workers if this goes on?
Yeah, this is the question. So the trucker hauling 4 or 5 containers today, next week, she probably hauls 2 or 3. The dock workers are no longer going to see overtime and double shifts. They're going to probably work less than a traditional work week, starting right off the bat. Every 4 containers mean a job. So when we start dialing this back, it's less job opportunities.
And what happens if we get a deal?
If we get a deal, it's going to take about a month. Let me walk you through that real quick. About 2 weeks to get the ships repositioned around these major ports, from Qingdao to Shanghai to Xiamen, load up all those containers, and then another 2 weeks to steam across the Pacific to get to us. This is important because now we're talking about spring and summer fashion. So we're kind of at a crux here that we've got to have something pretty quick.
This is where we are. And as the American people prepare for that scenario, best case scenario, if we have a deal right now, is a month. Donald Trump's approach appears to be, what are you complaining about? No big deal. He said so much in an interview with our colleague Kristen Welker on Meet the Press, where Trump dismissed a number of concerns.
Some prices are going up, tires, strollers, some clothing in the wake of your tariffs.
Excuse me, that's peanuts compared to energy. Energy is 60% of the cost.
But, sir, you campaigned on a promise to bring prices down on day
Well, I don't know. When
one.
you say strollers are going up, what kind of a thing? I'm saying that gasoline is going down. Gasoline is thousands of times more important than a stroller someplace.
But what do you say to Americans who say they voted for you because they want and they need relief right now?
And they're getting it.
Right now? What about those
even mortgage rates?
different items I just
Mortgage
mentioned?
rates are going down despite the fact that we have a stubborn Fed.
But you said even dolls could cost a couple bucks more.
Maybe they might, but you don't need to have, as I said, $35. You can have 2, 3, 4 and save a lot of money. We don't need to feed the beast.
I guess you're talking about this transition cost. How long should people expect that transition to last, Mr. President?
I can't tell you that. I can tell you that we're making a lot of money. We're doing great.
Donald Trump's war on toddlers, especially those who want dolls and strollers, continues. It's where we start today. Joining us now is the CEO of the Port of Long Beach, Mario Cordero. Also joining us, former Democratic Senator, MSNBC political analyst Claire McCaskill. And with me at the table, New York Times editorial board member, MSNBC political analyst Mara Gay. Mario, if you could just take me through, I'm from California. I was born in Newport Beach. I'm familiar with Long Beach and how central to the whole country's economy your business is. But just tell the story of what happens there and why it matters.
Well, thank you for having me. So, as you are aware, this is the largest container gateway in the United States. So whatever happens here is going to be a reflection on what happens to the country. So what is happening now, after Long Beach being the #1 port in containerized cargo for the first quarter of 2025, we are looking to a 35 or even a 40% reduction. And let me give you a number to support that. This week, ordinarily we would have expected 17 vessel calls. Right now, the number looks like 3. So it's more than a 50% reduction. So we've seen the impact we've seen the impact on Wall Street the last several weeks. Now we're going to start seeing the impact on Main Street.
Will you be able to sort of have top of mind the sorts of numbers that Gene had, that truckers, dock workers, every 4 containers is a job? Are those numbers the same for you?
That's correct. You know, less container volumes, less jobs for the dock workers, less truckers, and overall in the logistics supply chain.
And let me ask you the same question that he fielded there. If a deal were had this week, just talk about how quickly that means the economy would bounce back in terms of bringing things here, unloading them, and putting them back onto store shelves for Americans.
Well, we are in this globalized supply chain, so it's going to take a few weeks to bounce back. I mean, the good news is there appears to be conciliatory tones, both with regard to Washington and Beijing. So for now, we are now seeing that imports are being held in China. Bookings are about almost a 50% reduction. So if you're an importer, you're not going to send your goods to the United States until you have some clarity and then clarity on the tariffs. Because right now, if you're shipping goods from China, you're subject to a 145% tax. Now, we start seeing as of May 2nd, Friday, that if you ordered through an e-commerce company in China a pair of tennis shoes for about $175. The de minimis rule is no longer applicable. So that shoe now has gone up from $175 to approximately $350. That gives you the magnitude of the price increase that we're talking about.
Let me just throw some more numbers out to you while we have you. So there were 34 canceled sailings from ocean carriers to Long Beach, with another 36 cancellations heading into the port of Los Angeles. Do these numbers, we have it here that they already exceed the supply chain crisis that you experienced during COVID?
Absolutely. You know, between the two ports at this complex, we've had 70 canceled sailings, and that number exceeds the worst scenario in the COVID crisis.
Do your goods make their way, you know, how far across the country? I mean, how many consumers are impacted by that drop-off?
The goods that come to the Port of Long Beach, every congressional district in the mainland receives some sort of goods and cargo from the Port of Long Beach, all the way east to Atlanta.
Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland joins us now. He is the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman, thanks for being here.
I'm delighted to be here. So in the last hour, we had a little civics lesson about the Constitution, and in particular, Donald Trump's lack of understanding about the Fifth Amendment and due process. So we, just as Alicia led us in with the words of the oath of office, we had a conversation about what those words in the Fifth Amendment say to those that we elect about their duties and their responsibility when it comes to a little thing called due process. Yes. You know a little bit about that as a constitutional lawyer. Help frame for us why does Donald Trump seemingly get away with a higher degree of ignorance about the Constitution, to which he's sworn an oath not once but twice, and sits there and looks a reporter in the eye and goes, well, I don't know if I have to follow the Constitution? Help Americans understand what we're seeing in that moment and why they should be concerned.
Well, I think it's deliberate ignorance. I think it's feigned ignorance, because nobody knows due process better than Donald Trump. When he sat there in criminal trial in New York, leading up to his 34 criminal felony convictions, he made sure he had the best lawyers in the country. He made sure he saw all the evidence against him. He decided whether or not to exercise his privilege against self-incrimination. He decided not to take the stand. He brought up all the evidence that they could on their side. He had a unanimous jury deciding. Unfortunately for him, he lost. But he knows exactly what due process is about. He just doesn't think it goes for everybody. Now, in the immigration system, it's not a full-blown criminal trial. It's just you have the right to hear the charges against you. You have the right to put evidence on. It's a different standard of proof. It's easier to deport somebody than it is to convict somebody. But he understands the concept of due process. He knows that the tens of thousands of workers, including thousands of my constituents who've been sacked from their jobs, have not gotten 1 minute of due process from Doge and from Elon Musk. And the whole point of being in the civil service is you're supposed to be judged on the merits of your own job performance. Mm-hmm. But they just ran right over that, and they said on February 14th, the Valentine's Day massacre, they're just going to sack thousands of federal workers because they're on probation. They made it sound like that was something bad. They were on probation because most of them had been promoted and had done excellent work in their prior position, and they were promoted, or else they had just been hired. In any event, the denial of due process is something that runs through everything they're doing. And this is why Donald Trump, he says he doesn't know whether or not he's got to comply with the Constitution. Well, he should know by now, because more than 100 courts have entered preliminary injunctions or temporary restraining orders against all of the lawlessness that they've unleashed on the people of America.
I was reminded today that in 2022, Donald Trump actually called for the termination of the Constitution over the 2020 election results, and was, rebuked by some in the Republican Party. Other people dodged it, but I guess it shouldn't have been a surprise that he said what he said to Kristen Welker and to others, frankly, since then about the Constitution. Here's the rub here, I guess, as Michael Steele would say. the Constitution is not a suggestion, right? You're a constitutional law expert. It is not a suggestion. It is, in fact, the foundational document that governs how we operate as a country, as a people, to the point where without the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments in the Constitution, we wouldn't be sitting up in here. Mm-hmm. You know, without the 19th Amendment, there are things that the Constitution, as it has been amended, it has allowed for. And I think it should be really concerning to folks that the President of the United States seems to not believe in that. Is that accurate?
He wants to treat it like some fancy words, like it's the Declaration of Independence, so that's some high-minded ideals, or it's
a beautiful document.
It's Emma Lazarus's poem on the Statue of Liberty, or it's Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. No, this is our operating manual as a country. And to get high-minded about it would be just to say, and it is the covenant that we all agree to because it has meaning. You know, if you look at our Constitution, it's gotten more democratic over time. The vast majority of the amendments we've added since the original Bill of Rights are democratizing amendments, like abolishing slavery, equal protection, no discrimination in voting, direct election of U.S. senators, 19th Amendment, women's suffrage, 23rd Amendment, people in D.C. can vote for president, 24th Amendment, ban on poll taxes, and so on. There's a direction to it. But even if you don't believe in the dynamics of the Constitution, at least believe in the set of rules that are codified in it today. And that includes due process, freedom of speech, equal protection, all those things that he wants to toss out the window.
So we're in the middle of a constitutional crisis. You have the President of the United States giving interviews where he says he doesn't know if it's his job to uphold the Constitution. Meanwhile, your colleagues, House GOP judiciary members, are sending a letter to the D.C. clerk asking for information related to judicial assignment process and why Boasberg was assigned for Trump cases. Why is this their priority?
Because, as usual, they're attacking the messenger. Look, Judge Boasberg was appointed by President Bush to the bench. He's the chief judge of the D.C. District Court. He's seen as a pillar of the conservative legal establishment. He was Justice Kavanaugh's roommate back at Yale. But it's not just him. We've got lots of Republican appointees, even Trump appointees, who are striking down the actions of Doge and Elon Musk and striking down Donald Trump's executive orders. There were 4 judges, 2 Democratic appointees, 2 Republican, who struck down Donald Trump's attempt to repeal birthright citizenship in America. The most eloquent one, I thought, came from a Reagan-appointed judge who said, I've sat on the bench for 4 decades and I've never seen anything more unconstitutional than this, because it tries to overturn the first sentence of the 14th Amendment, which says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States.
Even what we saw on Friday, where you had a Trump-appointed judge out of Texas saying you can't use the Alien Enemies Act to deport people without due process.
Fascist and authoritarian leaders always love to step outside of the Constitution and describe an emergency. So he did that in that case, in the Alien Enemies Act 1798. And his own appointee said, no, you can't do that. We're not at war with Venezuela. If anybody's going to declare war on Venezuela, it's Congress, which is the power under Article 1 to do it. No, we've not been invaded by Venezuela. Anybody can see that, and therefore it doesn't apply. So you use the regular immigration process, which means due process, right? But he's done the same thing with the tariffs. I mean, it's Congress has the power to regulate international commerce, not the president, but he invoked a federal statute, IEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, right? For the first time, he uses it for tariffs, and he says there's an emergency. And how do you know there's an emergency? He said, because this has been going on for 4 decades and nobody's done anything about it. That doesn't sound much like an emergency to me.
Yeah, that's the longest emergency in history. It's 40 years.
Yeah.
So you said something that's very important, I think, because it really kind of moves into the next area of the Constitution that Donald Trump seemingly has wild abandon about. When you talk about the fascist dictator kind of mindset to sort of step outside the Constitution, it goes to the heart of what both Simone and Vice President Pence in the clip we heard coming in said, that the foundational aspects of that. So Donald Trump was at a recent National Day of Prayer. And he had this to say about that other little pesky thing in the Constitution called separation of church and state. Let's take a quick listen to that little ditty.
They say separation between church and state, they told me. I said, all right, let's forget about that for one time. We said, really, the separation? I don't know. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure. But whether there's separation or not, you guys are in the White House where you should be, and you're representing our country, and we're bringing religion back to our country.
I just like sometimes just like to drop stuff in the middle of the table, and anybody who wants to feast on it.
I just want to note, this is, they said that they would do this.
Yes.
This has been a movement. I think I heard it was Vice President Harris. I heard her say last week that when she addressed Emerge, part of her speech, and I'm going to paraphrase, but she noted that you have to remember that Donald Trump is a vessel for the chaos, but a plan that has been actively trying to be worked for decades. And he is just the vessel through which this plan is coming into fruition. But what Donald Trump is talking about there is a nod to this institutionalization of Christian nationalism.
Yes.
Like in putting the Bibles in the schools in Oklahoma, putting the Ten Commandments up. That's what he's talking about.
Well, first of all, just because you say you're...
And I love the Lord. I want to preface it with that. I love Jesus, honey. Grew up Baptist, AME now. But come on.
We will all stipulate.
Even Jesus said, give to Caesar what is Caesar and give to God what is God.
Well,
he just wants to give to God what
But look,
belongs to Caesar.
just because you say you're going to do something unconstitutional in the campaign, and I don't remember him saying that, but in any event, just because you say that doesn't make it constitutional. I mean, he was talking about in the campaign that, oh, well, I'm going to have 3 terms or 4 terms or whatever. That doesn't mean it's constitutional. The job of the courts is to figure out what the Constitution means, not what somebody said during the campaign or not. But in any event, on this point, there are too many people who are following him in this absolute constitutional nihilism. I mean, Louisiana and Texas have now voted to endorse the 10 Commandments and to post the 10 Commandments. I had MAGA colleagues coming in and saying, we should endorse the 10 Commandments. We should post the 10 Commandments. I said,
where?
The 10 Commandments have been, and I said the 10 Commandments have been doing fine for millennia without an endorsement by the U.S. House of Representatives. But they insist they want to
throw it away. I just tipped over my cup. Throw it away. Can I get a napkin?
They said they wanted to vote on it. And I said, you know what? If we're going to vote on the 10 Commandments in 2025, we should vote on each commandment separately, not the omnibus package. And you shouldn't be allowed to vote for any commandment you've ever violated yourself, because then you'll be taking the name of the Lord in vain.
That's a whole different kind of bill now.
Donald Trump apparently thinks it is really cute to pretend that he could be the next pope. So much so, he posted this AI image of himself as the pontiff, and doing it while the Vatican and the Catholic world are still in mourning. It is a move that any other politician or public figure would be vilified for. The Catholic bishops of New York State were not amused, saying, quote, "There is nothing clever or funny about this image, Mr. President. Do not mock us." The president was asked about the post at the White House earlier.
I had nothing to do with it. Somebody made up a picture of me dressed like the Pope, and they put it out on the internet. That's not me that did it. I have no idea where it came from. Somebody did it in fun. It's fine. Have to have a little fun.
A little fun. Again, any other public figure, politician would be vilified. The whole episode seems like another, though, in a long line of would-be contradictions or offenses that his religious supporters shrug off. Joining us now, New York Times columnist David French, and back with us, Doug Heye and Cornell Belcher. So, David, you're writing about the Christian right. I know that that's not Catholics, but you do have a line in here that I think is will help explain what's happening. And you say this: another way of putting it is that the religious right has divorced itself from historical Christian theology, but still holds its partisan beliefs with religious intensity. The religious fervor is there, Christian virtues or not, are not. Explain.
Yeah. Well, what you're seeing in the religious right supporting Trump is, where are you finding Christian virtues in the Trump movement right now? Where are you finding them? How do you see them? They're not there. They're just not there. But what is there is he's giving access to an awful lot of Christian conservative figures. And so they get access. They get to be in the room where it happens. So they're close to power and they love it. But they're not advancing any kind of Christian theology. They're not advancing any sort of Christian worldview. And this Pope situation is really indicative of what we're dealing with. We're dealing with nothing that's actual respectful to Catholicism at all. He's just playing around with it. He's joking with it.
So what do they believe?
Well,
what is the fervor?
The fervor is very anti-left. There's no question about this. This is where the tech right and the barstool right and the Christian right all join. They're very anti-left. But if you look at the historic positions of the Christian conservative movement, placing a high value on the pro-life movement, yet Trump had the most watered-down platform in generations, placing a high value in personal character. Read what Baptist said about character in politicians in the Clinton era. And all of that is just gone. It is now gone, and it's about power, and it's about opposing the left.
So it reminds me of the book that Tim Alberta wrote, trying to explain what happened to his church in an era of Trump. And one of the ways he does so is by saying that they believe that when the barbarians are at the gate, you need a barbarian to fight back against you. And what I'm getting from you is you don't really believe that the barbarians aren't, the traditional barbarians. It's just, I don't like the left.
Oh, it's very anti-left. I mean, look.
So Donald Trump wouldn't be a barbarian in this scenario.
Well, and think about how contrary this is to the example of Jesus, because Jesus comes to ancient Israel when it's under Roman occupation, where the people of Israel are deeply oppressed, and he doesn't come and overthrow the government. He doesn't come and rule in the way that these Christian right people want to rule. He comes in and he loves other people, he serves other people, and he even forgives the people who are executing him as they're executing him. And yet you look at this Christian right, the MAGA Christian right, it is will to power, it is cruelty, it is dominance. Look how they applaud as Trump is cruel to immigrants, just vicious, depriving them of their constitutional rights. This is nothing about this is drawn from historic Christian theology.
So when Donald Trump says he could be the Messiah, I mean, does he have a point with his supporters?
Well, it's interesting when you see this collision between supporting Donald Trump and, say, a commitment to character, and they choose to support Donald Trump. It tells you what's most important, doesn't it? And so what Trump has done is he's exposed for an awful lot of people that a lot of the Christian right, the Christianity was a facade behind which was hidden this will to power, this desire to dominate. And so he's figured this out. And so when he lets these people into the Oval Office, when he lets them into the inner sanctum, he's giving them exactly what they truly wanted, which was the access to power.
So, Cornel, to bring you into this, that is a level of devotion that is hard to break with a policy. I mean, that's a devotion to not just one party now, one man, because Donald Trump is the Republican Party. When you're trying to find a way to win against that, how do you win against a religious fervor that's embodied by one person?
You can't, and you don't. And look, I love David's writing here, but as someone who grew up in the South and in and out of Southern churches and understanding the long history of what evangelical, white evangelicalism has meant in the South, there is a tribal element to it, right? There absolutely, I would argue that there is absolutely a tribal element to it, and he is their tribal strongman. That goes beyond that. And look, there's always been a tinge of nationalism in that piece as well. And look, he's overwhelmingly won white evangelicals in his last two elections. In his last in 2020, he overwhelmingly won them and lost. And the latest election, he overwhelmingly won them and got a plurality. This is a core group of voters who are not going to move away from Donald Trump because Democrats come up with a better economic policy. Because, Katie, they're not supporting him because of his economic policies. They support his economic policies because they support him.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And David, one other thing that you read about is just the struggle to figure out where the party came from and what the ultimate goal was. Not the party, the white evangelicals, and that the critics would say they were just there to protect segregation. There were racist roots, and people who didn't believe that said no, it really was about fundamental life issues, protecting life, protecting an unborn child, and social religious issues. Where are you on that now?
Well, look, where I am is I was mistaken. When I was growing up within the evangelical conservative movement, I believed the story we told ourselves, which was this is a movement deeply rooted in Christian values, concern and care for the vulnerable, deeply rooted in a commitment to Christian character and to Christian charity, kindness, gentleness, humility, virtues like this. And so when Donald Trump came down the escalator, I had the mistaken impression that we had strong antibodies against this kind of man. But instead, evangelicals fell in line, often fell in line very willingly, very early on. And it turns out that a lot of the critics who are outside of the evangelical conservative movement saw it more clearly than I did inside it. They saw it as focused on power. They saw it as willing to compromise values. I did not see it that way.
But it wasn't just white evangelicals. I mean, it was the Republican Party who said there's no way that this guy can win. He's going after our veterans. That's anathema to GOP politics. So it was white evangelicals, but then it was also a lot of mainstream Republicans.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, you know, it started in not just when he took the escalator ride down, but in previous incarnations when he would visit Iowa and things like that in 2012 or even before, where it was seen as a joke. But he had a message that ultimately sold to a lot of the party faithful, which was the game. This is all a game. It's all a con, and I understand it. And a lot of Republicans didn't want to hear that or didn't believe it. And so we were caught by surprise by it, caught absolutely flat-footed, no doubt. And the other thing is, though, we should remember, you know, church attendance is down. And so those people who've left the flock, whether that's Catholicism or not, they need a place to go.
They go to a Trump rally.
They've gone to, or they go to political rallies. And for a lot of them, that's Trump. And politics is a new religion in a way that it wasn't 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago.
All right. Smartest conversation of the day. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on this. I appreciate it. David, so good to see you in person.
Well,
nice
it's so
to
great
have
to be
you in
here.
studio.
Thank you.
Let's bring in NBC's Vaughn Hilliard at the White House, Adrian Elrod, former senior advisor and senior spokesperson for the Harris-Walz campaign, and Brendan Buck, former press secretary to Speaker John Boehner and Paul Ryan. He's also an MSNBC political analyst. Vaughn, in this interview, President Trump didn't really box himself in on a number of key questions, including if he believes he has to follow the Constitution with these deportations. Also questions about his use of executive power. What more did we hear?
Right. He deferred repeatedly to his lawyers and the Department of Justice, effectively suggesting that he wants to take certain actions, but then obfuscating on whether he has the constitutional ability to do so. In some cases, it's very clear what the Constitution says. For example, in the case of the Supreme Court, making the determination that the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia must be facilitated by this White House, he deferred to his lawyers. But that first soundbite that you played from the president there was in direct response to Kristen's questions about whether he was taking this country down an authoritarian path, and that he has faced his scrutiny and criticism over it. And he never rejected the notion, instead made the argument that Americans knowingly voted in him as a leader and that he is doing what they wanted him to do. When it comes to dissent, take a listen to his response about the ability of individuals to speak up against his administration here in the country.
Do you see dissent as an essential part of democracy?
It's a part of democracy. It is. You're
Is
always
it an
going to have
important
dissent.
part of democracy?
Yeah, you're always going to have, Kristen, you're always going to have dissent. There's nothing you're going to do about that.
Do you think people should have the right to criticize you without fear of reprisal?
Absolutely, yeah, I do. That I do.
Of course, that runs counter to what is taking place across the country at universities. He's targeted the tax-exempt status of Harvard. He has targeted multiple law firms that have sought or been engaged in investigations in the past. He is going after the funding of PBS and NPR. He is targeting perceived political enemies, calling for the investigation of Miles Taylor, but also the Department of Homeland Security just this last Friday, acknowledging that there is an investigation into Chris Krebs, though providing no details. So on one hand, while the president is suggesting that there should be dissent allowed in the United States, on the other hand, he has an administration that is effectively working in many cases under the executive orders that he has signed, and many of them facing judicial questions in the court systems about their constitutionality. He is using his administration and individuals in his cabinet to go and target those individuals and those entities that are seeking to push back against the policies of his administration.
Brendan, Vaughn covered a lot of ground there, but I want to come back to what we heard the president say, that he doesn't know if he needs to uphold the Constitution. Is that going to raise any alarm bells with Republicans?
Well, it's not the first time he said something like this, and he's gotten a pass every time. I think this was a very clarifying interview. Usually it is table stakes for anybody elected to federal office, even Congress, but certainly you would hope the president, who appreciates what makes America special. Our system of government, the checks and balances, the Constitution. Those things are central and revered by most people who end up in Washington in positions of power. Donald Trump has a very different view on all of this. He views the presidency simply through the central power that it can provide him. And his worldview is, we all try to psychoanalyze Donald Trump. His worldview is pretty simple. If you're for Donald Trump, you're good. If you are critical of Donald Trump, you're bad. We saw that in Charlottesville with the rally there. We saw that on January 6th. Anything goes if you're for Trump. And then once the difference now is he has systems around him where people are willing to allow him to go after people, where maybe in his first term, there were people guarding him against those things. And so it's always been Donald Trump, but now people are aligned to help him figure out how to get around those balances of power and division of power that we have in our government.
Yeah, Adrian, he's questioning due process for migrants. He's deflecting questions about whether his attacks on the courts, law firms, and the media amount to an authoritarian playbook. And his answer appeared to be elections have consequences. Was that your read?
Well, they certainly do have consequences, Anna. I mean, I've said this time and time again on your show and on this network that when Donald Trump actually says he's going to do something, he does it. We heard this on the campaign trail a number of times when he said, I'm going to enact Project 2025. I'm going to restrict a woman's right to an abortion. I'm going to, enact tariffs and, cause essentially what we're now seeing as a trade war. These are things that he has said time and time again. He does not seem to care, to Brendan's point, whether or not the Constitution is going to get in the way or whether the courts are going to get in the way. He is going to do what he wants to do, and that is the problem. Therein lies the problem, because we have somebody who, the MAGA Republicans and Trump try to run on, we support the Constitution, we're, America first. They use the flag and they use, eagles and all the symbols of America in ways to try to show this patriotic posture. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the courts, when it comes to the Constitution, when it comes to, anything that they perceive to get in the way of the things that they want to accomplish, they don't care. They have a complete blatant disregard. This is something that we warned on the Harris and the Biden campaigns time and time again to the American people, that their democracy is at stake. The rule of law is at stake in this election. And now we are seeing it come to fruition. And we're just barely 100 days into his presidency.
Vaughn, this president was asked about his thoughts on a third term. He seemed to downplay that talk, despite those Trump 2028 hats that are being sold on his website.
Right. He never explicitly said that he is ruling out a third term, yet when questioned by Kristen about whether he would seek to change the Constitution and amend it in order to allow him to run, he pushed the notion aside, saying that he intends to just serve 2 terms, but also threw out the names of 2 individuals that could take the mantle, the MAGA mantle, from him afterward. Take a listen.
Are you seriously considering a third term, Mr. President, even though it's prohibited by the Constitution? Or is this about staying politically viable?
I will say this. So many people want me to do it. I have never had requests so strong as that. But this is not something I'm looking to do. I'm looking to have 4 great years and turn it over to somebody, ideally a great Republican.
When asked who those Republicans may be, he named 2 individuals specifically, his vice president and his secretary of state. Anna.
I'll circle back to that in just a second. But Adrian, are you reassured by the president saying he's got no plans for a third term?
Absolutely not. I mean, he has flirted with this notion time and time again. His political arm has created these, Trump 2028 hats. This is something he's talked about time and time again, that he wants to run for a third term. He's also saying, Anna, that he has a mandate, that this is what the American people want. He hears it time and time again. I just want to remind your viewers, Trump did not win on a mandate. He had a decisive win. I'll give him that in this last election. But he won by 1.5% of the national vote. That is far from a mandate. So, this is, again, why the courts are so important, why process is so important. And I think, again, we should take Trump for his word, because when he says he's going to do something, he usually ends up doing it.
I want to play some of the sound that Vaughn referenced there in terms of who carries the MAGA movement forward after this term in office. Let's watch.
When you look to the future, Mr. President, Do you think the MAGA movement can survive without you as its leader?
Yes, I do.
What gives you?
I think it's so strong, and I think we have tremendous people. I think we have a tremendous group of people. We talked about a number of them. You look at Marco, you look at J.D. Vance, who's fantastic. You look at, I could name 10, 15, 20 people right now just sitting here.
Brendan, are you surprised he's naming names? And Rubio and Vance, did you ever think those two would be seen in the same light as carrying forward the MAGA mantle?
Well, I agree with them that MAGA is not going away anytime soon. I don't think that anybody other than Donald Trump will be able to get away with the kind of stuff that Donald Trump does. But there really isn't much of another wing of the party at this point. And that's why Marco Rubio has found himself where he is. I think he realized he was certainly more of a traditional conservative, found himself in the administration because he went along with it. He realized that there is no other safe place. Marco Rubio is clearly up right now in Trump world. He's got 4 different jobs, I think, at this point. But you know, people always have their ups and their downs, so we'll see where we are. J.D. Vance seems to be back in good graces. He had notably not handed the torch off to J.D. Vance when previously asked about these types of things. Yeah, we've got a long way to go from here, but I do think that whoever is next is going to try to run in the same mantle of Donald Trump. But let's also see where the economy is in 3 or 4 years after these tariffs and whether that's going to be a particularly popular place to go more broadly.
And there is only one Donald Trump in terms of just the way he operates, which is unlike anyone else we've ever seen in political life, at least in this country. Vaughn, meanwhile, the president now says he wants to rebuild and reopen Alcatraz, which hasn't been used as a penitentiary since 1963. What's behind all this?
Right, more than 60 years ago, and it was shut down back in the 60s because of the difficulty in getting resources from fuel and supplies and personnel to the island off of San Francisco in the first place. And Nancy Pelosi, the former speaker, who actually, this is her district, she called this overnight a not serious proposal. There are already more than a dozen federal penitentiary systems for that high maximum security type of institutions. I want to let you listen, though, nonetheless, to the president suggesting this. Take a listen.
Where did you get the idea for reopening Alcatraz?
Just an idea I've had, and I guess because the judges, so many of these radicalized judges, they want to have trials for every single, think of it, every single person that's in our country illegally. It's got quite a history, frankly. So I think we're going to do that, and we're looking at it right now.
Of course, this comes after questions of the decision by this administration to attempt to send hundreds of individuals, detainees, overseas to El Salvador's mega prison. And so amid that scrutiny, the president now suggesting that potentially Alcatraz could be used instead.